going to be on one of the world's, considered to be one of the world's worst warlord criminals ever in history. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. World's worst warlord criminal throughout history. His name was Joesph Kony. He was the leader of the Lord's Resistance Army, better known as the LRA. Now, it was a guerrilla group that operated out of northern Uganda. As I've always said, we must first understand the person's childhood to understand the motives behind what they're doing currently. So Joesph was born in 1961 in Odek, a village east of Gulu in northern Uganda. Now, his parents were farmers, and their names were Lucy Ado and Nora Oting. His tribe was the Okoli people. He was the youngest of 6 children, although some say he was second to youngest. Neither here nor there, right? So let's just move on, right? So, although it is said that he had an awesome, amazing relationship with all of his siblings, he was also known to use physical violence after a dispute, and we're talking at a very young age. Now, another crucial thing to understand about Joesph Kony's development as far as childhood and adolescence and adulthood would be that his parents were very strict Catholic. In fact, both his parents were very involved with the Catholic Church as well as their farming. Now, also, in fact, his older sister, Gabriela Lecoq, she still lives in Odek to this day. Although Joesph never finished elementary school, he was and remained an altar boy until 1976. Now, he decided to drop out of school completely at the age of 15. It was around 1995 that Joesph managed to rise to power within the Okuli Land Nation. Now, after the Holy Spirit movement of Alice Omua was also known as Lakuana, and Joesph believed that they were related. Even though, he just believed that they were related. You have to understand that in 1981 through 1986, the Ugandan Bush War was actively going on. Now, eventually, the Okoli president, Tito Okola, was overthrown by Yoweri Museveni and his army, the National Resistance Army, better known as the NRA. That's ironic, I think, right? At least when I was doing the research material, that I had to have a little chuckle to myself about that one personally. But anyways, so this also led to mass looting of livestock, which is like the Okuli's main thing is livestock and farms, okay? As well as rape, burning of their homes, and mass genocide in general. And this happened daily, as well as sanctioned murder by Yoweri Museveni and the NRA directly, including the leader directly. So, the atrocities, the horrors committed by the NRA are now known as the Uganda People's Defense Force, led to the creation of the LRA, started by Joesph Kony himself. Now, eventually, even concentration camps in northern Uganda started to form up. Over 2 million people were confined in them. The governments burned people alive as well as their land. Now, they used helicopter gunships to take out mass people in the village. Now, eventually, they were forced to leave the northern Uganda region completely. However, global campaigns called for the end of the concentration camps, as well as the people to be returned to their land. So in 2006, the Juba peace talks started with the LRA rebels. Now, Museveni's government allowed them to be able to be returned. It marked the beginning of the rehabilitation of homes, roads, and the community as a whole. Now, Joesph eventually was implicated in the abduction and recruitment of child soldiers. Now, don't forget that the LRA and the NRA are separate armies. They're not the same army. A lot of people get them confused, but they're not the same army. They're actually separate armies. In fact, the LRA had been fighting the NRA, or better known as by this point the UPDF, within Uganda and South Sudan for their 10 years straight. So in 2008, the Ugandan army invaded the DRC in search of the LRA. Now, they called it Operation Lightning and Thunder. Around November of 2013, Joesph was reported to be in very poor health, and he was living in the eastern Kar town of Nozuka. When you look at that 10 years as a whole, Joesph forces had been responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 and the abduction of at least 60,000 children. He and his army committed brutal rapings of young girls, abducting them and using them as sex slaves, both selling them and within their own army. Real quick, never mind. The official counts of the LRA militia members has varied significantly over the years, however. They have reached as high as 3,000 soldiers. By 2017, the organization's memberships have started to shrink, however, to the low number of around 100 soldiers. But you got to keep in mind that they're still active to this day. It's about to be 2020 next year. And the LRA are still active. They might be small, but they're still active to this day. So by April of 2017, both the United States and the Ugandan governments ended their efforts officially to find Joseph Kony and the LRA, stating that they no longer held a security risk to Uganda because of his poor health of the leader. So in October of 2006, the International Criminal Court, better known as the ICC, officially announced the arrest warrants for 5 members of the LRA command for crimes against humanity, following a sealed indictment. So get this, no more than the very next day, Uganda Defense Minister Amumu Mbabazi revealed that the warrants included Joseph Kony himself, as well as his personal deputy, Vincent Odi, and LRA commanders Raska Lukui, Oka Odhimba, and Dominique Ongwan. Now, according to the official spokesperson for the Ugandan military, stated the Ugandan army killed Lukui on October 12, 2006. November of 2006, Joseph Kony met with Jan England, the UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. Joesph said, "I am a freedom fighter in this interview. I am not a terrorist. We do not have any children. We only have combatants." And what he meant is soldiers. Now, let's look at Joseph Kony's belief system as a whole, because I feel like you have to understand that. Now, a lot of Joseph's followers, as well as people that left the LRA or managed to live when they escaped, believe him to be possessed by spirits. Joesph told his children, for example, meaning his personal children and the army, that a cross on their chest, drawn in oil, in holy oil, will protect them from the enemy bullets. And they actually believed it full-heartedly, without question. Joesph was fond himself of polygamy. He was known to have 60 wives and personally had 42 children. 42 children! Joesph always said he led the LRA. Joesph always said that him and the LRA are fighting for the Holy 10 Commandments. He would say it is not a bad thing. How could it be bad? I and the LRA are fighting the God's fight. We are commanded by God himself. Therefore, myself nor the LRA have violated any of these so-called human rights that the reporter was speaking of. Joesph believed himself to be a spiritual medium. In fact, in 2008, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni wanted to engage in peace talks. Joesph responded to him personally saying, "I will not use a telephone, I will communicate through the Holy Spirits. In fact, in 1994, during another peace talks, Joesph was preceded by other men who wore robes, and they were sprinkling holy water in front of him as he was walking. Now, a former LRA officer who eventually left the faction said Joesph had found biblical justifications for killing witches and killing people who would farm as well as eat pigs because of the biblical story of swine, and for killing other people, saying Joesph would say God did the same thing with Noah's flood and Sodom and Gomorrah. Therefore, Joesph said, we must do the same, for God led our way. So, before I go into my little personal spiel on Joseph Kony, I want us to look at an actual timeline. Because a lot of people are going to be like, was there ever any efforts? I mean, the guy was brutal, but was there ever any efforts to catch him? And in fact, there really was. In 1989, he was actually captured by the Ugandan government. In 1992, the Ugandan government officially released him, saying he was no longer a threat. August 28th of 2008, the United States Treasury Department placed Joseph Kony on its list as specially designated global terrorist. Now, November of 2008, the U.S. President George W. Bush signed the United States Africa Command to provide financial and logistical assistance during the Ugandan 2008 through 2009 Garomba Offensive, codenamed Operation Lightning and Thunder. Aha! So, May of 2010, President Obama signed into law LRA disarmament in Northern Uganda Recovery Act legislation aimed at stopping Joseph Kony and the LRA. October of 2011, President Obama authorized the deployment of approximately 100 combat equipment as well as over 100 U.S. troops to Central Africa. March 21st, 2014. The U.S. announced they would deploy at least 4 CV-22 Ospreys and refueling planes, as well as 150 Air Force Special Forces personnel to capture Joseph Kony. March 23rd of 2012, the African Union announced its intentions to send 5,000 soldiers to join the hunt for rebel Joseph Kony, neutralizing him and isolating his soldiers, which are responsible for 2,600 killings since 2008, and they're still ongoing. So, Kony 2012 was a 30-minute documentary titled Kony 2012 by filmmaker Jason Russell for the campaign group Invisible Children Incorporated was finally released. Now, the surrender of Ogwana. Now, Ogwana served as a key member of the LRA, and he was a known senior aide to Joseph Kony himself, as well as other officials within the LRA. Ongwaden surrendered himself to CAR January of 2015. At that point, only Joseph Kony was still left in leadership, or they thought. April of 2017, U.S. and Ugandan military end their campaign to find Joseph, stating him and the LRA are no longer a threat. So, going back a little bit on my free thought, as I stated, this was going to be a shorter podcast than what everybody's used to. However, my next podcast will actually be full length, with what you guys are used to. But going back to Joseph's childhood, you remember how people stated that he was very physically violent towards his siblings after a dispute. It could have been a minor dispute. From what I read, it could be anything from dropping a cup, misplacing something, something trivial, something very small, and Joesph would just go very belligerent, violent on his siblings over that. So that was showing at a very, very young age, and I would definitely consider that a red flag myself. Now, also, you had the aspect that both his parents were very well-respected people in the community within his tribe. And on top of that, he was very loyal to the Catholic Church, as well as his parents. His parents being such devout Catholics and so loyal to the Catholic Church. Now, one has to wonder, what was going on in Joseph Kony's childhood home? We don't know much about his parents' relationship with Joseph Kony at all. So we don't know if there was any abuse sexually or physically towards Joseph Kony by his parents at all, because there's no actual documentation of anything. However, we can say that there was a lot of church doctrine put into Joseph Kony's head from a very young age. And you see this aspect in the fact that they said that he dropped out of school, but he remained an altar boy until he was, 17 years old. That right there shows tremendous dedication to the church. Now, somewhere along the lines, whenever he started fighting and joining these different forces, that appears to be when he finally realized he could use what I would call the native African tribal belief system, which he mixed up with Catholicism to make it easier to brainwash people. I think this is one of the ways that he probably rose to power so rapidly within a faction. And rose to power to the point to where he could actually form his own army called the LRA, and then start fighting the very army that he just left. This is what I'm doing is I'm trying to show the mindset of Joseph Kony. And this has been whenever he was a very young man. I would say around his middle 20s or later 20s, whenever he was forming the LRA. Now, hold on. There's a really famous picture of Joseph Kony, and he's stretched out like this, and he has dreadlocks on. And he's wearing a yellow tank top and these brown pants, and behind him is just a ton of children. Now, later on at the end of this episode, you're going to see that picture in 2 times. In my slideshow, you're going to see that picture 2 times, and one of those pictures actually shows how the picture was altered, but the reason why it was altered, which is to prove a very good point. Now, there is one original picture, which is a couple rows of children, one row going across. Joseph was very fond of children. In fact, he abducted children left and right throughout his whole time. Whenever the research material was stating that he would, the LRA, including Joseph Kony himself, would abduct these children, I want you to understand that whenever the boys were abducted, and as far as what I could tell, even the girls when they were abducted, they were forced to execute their parents to show loyalty to Joseph Kony. And if they didn't do that, and if the girls weren't willing to marry Joseph Kony or go with the army, he would actually cut their faces or cut their nose, and they would mutilate it with a machete, making it appear as though it was a pig's snout. They would mutilate the face as well, which you're also going to be able to see in the slideshows as well. I did show a lot. I managed to get a lot of information for this podcast. Unfortunately, a lot of the research material was very quickly done. I do want to point out, though, at the end of this episode is going to be a lot. And when I say a lot, I'm talking a ton of extra audio. And this is going to be clips. Now, if you haven't seen the Kony 2012 film, I highly suggest that you look into it. However, today, at the end of this episode, you will actually be able to hear the whole movie of Kony 2012, although it will be audio, and I did pictures to go along with that, as I always do. You're also going to be able to hear traditional Congolese army music, meaning the tribal music, whenever I did the traditional Congolese tribal war music as well at the end of this documentary. And there's some other extra things at the end of this as well. I mainly wanted to point out that there is so much stuff that people don't understand about him. And I do find it sad that the fact that both governments, the United States, my own government, and the Ugandan government and other African governments consider him not a threat anymore and just let him basically die off. Now, I'm not too sure. I want to say Joseph Kony is finally dead. But he managed to do this his whole life. And these women that he married, all these wives, they weren't cooperating wives. These were girls that they abducted as young as well, you name it, as young as you want. I believe they killed them up until the age of 6, and then they would take them, and sometimes even younger than that, just depending, I think. Um, Hold on one second. Now, also, the boys were also forced to kill their parents as well as the girls, like I stated. And this is to show loyal to Joseph Kony. Basically, Joseph Kony would be their father after that point in their whole world. And the boys would go into the LRA's version of basic training shortly after being inducted and be put on the front lines. You're going to see evidence of this as well at the end of this episode. This is an episode I personally wanted to do. I normally do request. I actually personally wanted to do this one, although it is short, because of the fact that this is such recent timing. Most of the time, when you look at atrocities of war, most people look at the past. I don't consider 2012 that long ago. And in 2012, he was still burning down villages, raping girls, turning them into sex slaves and human trafficking, as well as abducting children and turning them into soldiers. And forced to do whatever the elder soldiers told them to do and whenever they told them to do it. So by no means was this person humble at all, is what he may sound. And the reason why I'm saying that is I also included the original interview that Joesph Kony did. Do you remember the person in the research material? Hold on one second. I just want to make sure I get the name right. Oh, wrong person. I don't have it right offhand, but the female that was interviewing him, I actually have that full interview available at the end of this episode as well. And the reason why the research material was so hard to find is, although you can find the war crime information that Joesph Kony did very easily on the internet, as well as the LRA, it's very hard to get official information about Joesph Kony. I found out. I tried. So I did the best I could with the information I was able to gather for this episode. So I wanted to include some of his childhood. I wanted to include some of his adolescence, which we found out was spent in the Catholic Church as an altar boy until he was 17. So right after, 17 years old, he ends his altar boy career. He just starts killing and massacring, and that was the rest of his life. Now, we're going to move on, and I do want to announce that my next episode will actually be full length. I'm halfway done with the research material as of now for that. And that is actually going to be on Joseph Mingle, a.k.a. the Dr. Death, or the Angel of Death, however you want to say. And that will be a full-length podcast. But this one is a little bit shorter. It's the first short one I've ever done. So I hope it actually does well. Again, this has been on Joesph Kony. Everybody stay tuned for the end of this episode because there is a lot of good audio stuff featured after this video. For my audio listeners, please go to my YouTube channel at Working Class Thoughts Online Library to actually see all the extra audio stuff that's on this episode. I highly encourage you to do that, and just so people don't forget what happened in Uganda, what happened in Congo, and what's still happening in Uganda and Congo as a whole. As I stated, the LRA are still active. They may be very small in numbers, but the LRA is very active still, as well as other military groups and other militia groups all over that region that are still burning down villages, still abducting children, and still abducting girls, and still turning them into sex slaves, both within their groups and on the market selling them in human trafficking. So again, this has been Mike for Working Class Thoughts. This has been a short segment on